Today I have a wonderful guest, a guest I have met already before in a slightly different setting. My guest today is Jules Schroeder. I think I pronounced a little too softly your family name, but I hope you don't mind. Hi, Jules.
Hey, Christina. Hello, everyone. And it's morning over here. So I'm in Colorado in the US today. So
In that case, you need a pleasant conversation even more than I do. Uh, because it sets your day. So an official beginning, and then we'll start. So Jules is ranked by Inc. magazine as #1 of the top 27 female entrepreneurs changing the world and one of the top 40 millennials to follow. Jules is a musician, a visionary on a mission to inspire people to create a life by their own design, which is really cool because I also have a program Live by Your Own Rules. So it's definitely the topic I want to touch upon. So with this vision, Jules created Unconventional Life, a Forbes column, and a top-ranked podcast for entrepreneurs that feature the stories of millennials living from this new paradigm. Unconventional Life has reached millions of people from over 75 different countries and has become a global community of like-minded entrepreneurs, influencers, creatives, and thought leaders. And Jules herself has always been multi-passionate as an avid CrossFitter, yoga teacher, musician and singer, writer, avid traveler, and overall life enthusiast. So I do believe that we met when I met you, you were a podcaster and a thought leader and an influencer. So to be honest, I'm actually a little bit surprised when I discovered that you are very much a musician, in fact. Which somehow I didn't realize before. So hi, Jules. Hi, everyone. We're going to be talking about creativity, but I do believe that I might want to ask a little bit about living unconventionally, the way you like. So, Jules, maybe I know it's maybe a soft question to start for honest conversations, but can you tell your story just a little bit? Why musician? Why unconventional life? Because I've seen the videos and it looks like you put on some really amazing events, very similar to what we do, as in energy and the atmosphere. So how did you come to that? What brought you there?
yeah, well, I love the title of these conversations, Christina, just the honest conversations. I think it's a great way, especially in the times that we're in, to just strip things back, get personal. And at the end of the day, I think so many of us are in these big evolutions and awakenings. And my music was a part of my self-expression that I always felt like, I remember my dad was working Wall Street in New York City. I was the oldest of 5 growing up. And I remember being 18, feeling like my whole life was ahead of me and I wanted to go into music. And he's like, well, only the 1% make it. And that's so risky. And if you're going to do that, then you should know all these things. And I believed him. And I was like, I should get really good in business. And so I did. And I noticed that even as I had successful companies, I started my first 6-figure company at 18, 7-figure company at 22. I had a business partner embezzle a bunch of money at 24, went into a couple $100,000 worth of debt. So that was a whole nother side of that experience. No matter what I accomplished, there was still this part of myself that felt incomplete or that felt missing. And I think a lot of us, no matter what we're doing in our life, sometimes we have this nagging sensation that says that there's more. And 9 years later, after wanting to start my music career, I finally created my first album. And I actually just released my 3rd album now, 4 years later, called Vancouver on Spotify. And it's been incredible to watch that transition. But I found that when I finally leaned into my music and the part of my self-expression that I had so compartmentalized, it actually not only gave me that fulfillment, but it also made everything else in my life completely increase, from my happiness, also from the success of my company and all those other things. And my whole journey actually began with a near-death experience about 5 years ago. It was a wakeboarding accident. And, I can share that story if you'd like, but it was really from that experience. Yeah. Well, so it was literally in 2015. I was out in Colorado wakeboarding, and I was also a professional snowboarder before. So I was a big extreme adventure athlete. And I remember, with the boys, and it was to see who could get the most air that day. And I launched and I came down and I face planted. And about an hour later, I got off the boat and I remember being in the bathroom and I started to feel my whole body go numb and tingly. And I just remember looking at a friend of mine, like something wasn't right. And they took me to the hospital. And then my next memory was coming out of the MRI and being approached by this white figure and 6 Black Shadow Council member. And we had this conversation that was, Jules, you have more work to do in the world. Do you want to do it? They thought at the time my neck was broken. They thought I was paralyzed. And I just remember saying yes. as long as I don't come back as a vegetable. And in that next moment, I was zapped back into my body. I felt this energy forge my neck back together and shoot down my spine. In the moment that I woke up that day, I felt like everything shifted. It was the completion and end of the era of life being driven by me and the start of the era of life coming through. And it was literally, 3 weeks later, I'm in a neck brace and I get a call from a woman at the United Nations. And she's like, I'd love for you to be a global ambassador for education as part of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm like, it's not really the best time. I just kind of like had this whole experience. And this voice was like, tell her you've got this initiative called Create You to reimagine higher education. And I'm like, at this point, I'm like, I must have completely lost my mind, or something really incredible is happening. Flash forward 3 weeks later, I'm at the UN. I get approached by Forbes Under 30. They asked me to start writing for them. I host the first official podcast of Forbes Under 30, get into live events, and life just really evolved from that point. And so it was definitely a practice of deep listening. And a lot of what I believe, you don't think you have to go through a near-death experience to have these awakenings, but to start to listen and hear is how, life comes through now.
So it looks like you've managed to accomplish quite a lot very fast in your life, because you mentioned this and that and a lot of things that you have accomplished in a very short time. So was it during your period when life was driven by you, or was it more accomplished during the period when life was coming through you? And what's the difference? Because I think it's a very interesting distinction that you're making, especially considering that in the contemporary world and in personal growth as well, the idea that you have to be in the driver's seat is super important. So where's that shift? Like, are you now running the chessboard? How does it work?
Yeah, well, I had a friend of mine when I was at lunch yesterday, and he's like, so how do you feel like you're living on purpose? And what's the signifier of living on purpose? And I don't necessarily know if you ever figure it out. And I think there was a way before, when life was being driven by me, that it was always one accomplishment to another accomplishment. The thing is that success, in my own experience, is always a moving target. So even when I would get, that client or get that goal, I would never have that experience of success. It was always external. And it actually took, literally it was a year before that I went through that embezzlement, and all of my world from what I thought unraveled, from money to success to all those things, that I actually finally got in a place where I could hear and I could actually understand and listen and really adapt to more of this life coming through perspective. And I find now that I'm just a steward of the vessel. And I really believe that all of us, we're a channel. We've got a nice hose hooked up to the sky. There's a tap that throttles, and, it's our life force that comes through, and we express in all these beautiful ways. And, for me, there were so many kinks in the hose, whether it was fear or circumstance, or it was always put on someone else, that I started to shift that, in after that. And it really became less about what I said or the content of what I created, but could I be the best steward and the best translator for that which I needed to come through, so that I could create that in my world, in whatever expression, music, events, podcast. And when I let go of doing it right, or let go of what the thing needed to be, I started honoring actually the reverence and the devotion of the divine, of the gift. And that, I find, is what's really allowed the success, at least over the last many years since that near-death experience, to shift. And not only that, I think it's allowed my own experience of success to shift, where it isn't about what I do, but it's who I be in that process.
I want to get back to our conversation, obviously. I know you mentioned that you never know what is that bigger purpose really is, or at least that's how it feels. But what is your most important purpose right now? Because you are doing a lot of things. Are they all geared towards the same purpose, or they're different things and different expressions? If they are, what is the most important job you are doing right now? I know it's a little bit unfair question, but just this moment is good. You don't have to give like the life purpose for the next 50 years.
Yeah, well, I would say that music is definitely my North Star right now. And I find the common thread of all of that is just awakening and empowering people to create a life by their own design. It's taking that feeling that we have inside of us and creating an external reality that allows that internal knowing to feel a sense of congruency. And I find, I've always been a multi-passionate being. I'm imagining many of you, if you're multi-passionate, just go ahead and put that in the chat as well, of being a multi-passionate, self-expressive person. And there's not a place for that. It was like, you must choose something, or I must be something, rather than I find when all parts of my self-expression get a seat at the table, that's when I actually feel that sense of wholeness and completion. And so I found in my work that music, art, it's a shortcut to the soul. Our creativity, our power, when we are actually using that, we skip the filter of the mind and it actually becomes something felt. And so you might listen to this conversation and maybe remember something I said or something that Christina said, but you'll remember how you felt during it. You'll remember what that was like. And I find that music, it creates that in such a more effortless way. And I also do a lot of spoken word, improvisational like channels and things like that. And maybe if there's time, I'll, co-create and we could do like a spoken word channel or something like that. But I find that as I leaned into my art paves the way for everything else. And I believe as we come into business and our life more, it is through our art and through our heart, through our creativity, that actually is creating what this new paradigm is. And so I think unleashing that is definitely where my inquiry is most. And I think that's the gateway to everything else.
So we did mention that we're going to be talking about creativity, and you said that in the very beginning you were interested to become a musician, but you were convinced that, or at least your father convinced you that that's not a reasonable career. So were you always creative, or is it also something which is like a tap that you can switch on and off, or maybe accidentally break? What is creativity really? Like, what is it as a phenomenon?
Yeah, I find creativity, it's our life force in the way that I relate to it, and it's infinitely available. And the thing is that when I, being 18 and being at that age, and even all throughout my 20s, it was something that I shut down. And then the more I shut it down, the more I believed I didn't have it. And that's the same thing with intuition in my own experience. The more, I think that things are weird, or I'm not in control of them, or they're not normal, or whatever it might be, then it's like, oh, that's not for me. She's got it or he's got it, but I don't have it. And then my world of possibility gradually got smaller and smaller and smaller. And then when I realized, hey, these are all self-imposed limitations that we put on us, I started yesing my creativity. I started yesing my intuition. And just like going to the gym or working out, the more I yesed that which I felt and that was inside of me, the more I had access to it. And the more I got better at it. And then the irony was, like, it took me 9 years. I created all those successful companies, and it took me 9 years to write one music album. And then as soon as I yesed that I am an artist, like within the last 4 years, I've probably put out over 30 songs, and I'm literally about to go in the studio with a big, LA producer next week to do a whole nother album. And so inside of that, and just something to leave all of you with, is that there are those nudges. And I find how you get access to creativity is you just start creating conditions, or you start creating structure just to yes it. And that might be something small where, I said every single morning for like 2 minutes, I'm just going to like sing as I'm getting ready. And I didn't care what I was singing, if it had a background, if it had anything. I would just literally, and sometimes I'd even be singing about like in the mirror, like I'm brushing my hair, brushing my teeth, like having a good day. And I would just allow myself to have these micro moments of expression that then when I went to sit down and actually create, the pump was primed. And I started to know myself as that. And the last thing is I started talking about it. And I think this is another thing, is it felt like it was the most shy part of my expression. Like, oh, people could never see this about me. And I don't know if I'm very good. And if I'm not very good, then I shouldn't represent myself in this way. Yeah. And when I just started including that I am an artist and that I do music, even before I was or did, I also noticed that the world, universe, God showed up to really give me more of that. So creating that condition of yes in my life, and then I've seen this in others, create that condition of yes to these parts that you've historically kept shy or compartmentalized, allows them to really show up and thrive.
I do have a lot of questions about creativity, and hope I won't forget some of them. One of them would be, I do some creative things as a hobby, and I have this interesting I don't know, puzzle in my head. What makes you an artist, really? Is it about creating something just for the sake of creating for your own pleasure, or is there this necessary transition from doing it just for yourself to actually gifting the world with what you're creating? Is being public about your creativity an important condition to be, or to consider yourself an artist?
Yeah, I think it's both and, right? And I think for me, for many years, being public about it wasn't actually part of the game that I was playing. And then it got to a point where, for me, at the end of the day, like, I'm in the business of transformation. And how do I create transformation at scale? And I recognize that the more activated I am in my gifts, and this is for all of us, the more activated we are and expressed in our gifts, big, small, whatever way that looks, I believe the more transformation at scale for our world, for our planet, for all of us gets to be a part of it. And so I find that art is very much something that you can transmute experience. Like, I notice in my songs, it's a lot of what I write about is love, death, transformation, and freedom. And those are just themes that I experience in the world. And sometimes I can't even make sense of them cognitively. But when I'm writing, I'm just transmuting. And same thing with painting or whatever that creative expression might be. And I find that doing that opens up a little bit of permission for other people, or I like to say, per my mission, that once you've given that, it allows someone else just to have a piece of like, oh, if they can do it, or if she can do it, or if he can do it, then it opens up a little micro nuance that then allows for more compounding transformation as a whole. And so I find, though, art, the moment that, it's the interesting thing, it's the moment that I try to control it, or the moment I try to identify it, it's the very moment that it goes away. And the moment I stay a steward to the process of it, it's the very moment that infinite potentiality occurs. But then when I'm like, oh, I want to do something with it, it's gone. And then the moment I'm open to it, it's here. And the moment I try to control it, it's gone. And so it's a very intangible, but also a beautiful present moment practice. And that's the last thing I'll say about art, is that I find it's all about being present in real time. And even how I create, or even how others create, I find that when you're present in real time with that which you're feeling and that which you're perceiving and receiving, that's when the most authentic art, or the most felt art, is actually shared, because you literally just translated your own experience into someone else's experience that allowed new possibility to show up.
A slightly maybe technical question about creativity as well, and the art, because we're talking about art, and of course I'm talking about art in a general term, as in anything, any creation, not just art, like a visual art. So what's the place of master in there? Because the way I perceive a lot of art which is created nowadays, it's about really what you're saying, being in the present, expressing yourself, being maybe sincere in your expression. Though I studied art in school when I was a kid, and it was still Soviet days, and I remember that rigid education, Soviet education, where mastery was of paramount importance. So you wouldn't consider yourself an artist unless you actually were really good at the technique. And here I'm talking about visual art per se. So what's the balance between actually the technique and the natural expression, if I can say so? Why I'm asking at that, because there's the extreme on both sides, where there is expression without any mastery, and then there is such high mastery that it becomes handicrafts rather than an actual expression of any creativity. So what's the balance for you?
Yeah, I love that question. And for those that are tuning in, if you identify being an artist, go ahead and just put in the chat, what is your superpower, or your creative superpower, or your art? I'd love to just get a pulse of, some of who we all have with us today. And
you leave your questions, by the way, in the question mark, because I'll ask Bianca to bring someone up soon. Yeah.
Perfect. I find, for me, the way that I stay with the nuance of it is really commitment to consistency. And so, we've heard about the 10,000 hours, right? Whereas, like, if you do your 10,000 hours in something, then you're an expert, or you're a genius at it. And I think that having raw talent, is important. But I also find that when I'm consistent, even a few minutes, a day, or whatever it might be, that over time, that's where I actually see the progress, versus, I'm doing something for a few hours once a week, and then I don't do it for another week. And I'm just loving some of this. A singer and actor, Maggie, storytelling, writing, blogging. I love that, Robert, photographer. Yeah, so good. Just getting a scope of how we do art. And I do think it's important to stay committed to the craft. This last year, I joined this vocal mastermind program where I looked at, I was good but I wanted to be extraordinary. Like I actually got interested in the game, but that wasn't my game for a while before. My game for a while was, am I even good enough to create my art? Which I talk to any artist and they're like, am I good enough? Or any like musician and they're like, oh, that album was great, but I don't know, was it even good? And they go to launch it and it's like a whole existential crisis. And so I think that's part of it too. But I find creating that structure for excellence, if that's your game, is great. And I think that's the most important part, is just defining what is the game that you're playing with art. And it might just be the game of consistency. And I want to know myself if I'm consistent for, say, a month, every single day. Once I get past what I know, I start to understand what I don't know that I don't know. And then I'm in a whole another distinguished world, which I think is like some of the best stuff comes from. Or your game could be actually for excellence. And so I think if you define the parameters for what the game is that you're playing with it, then the steps show up to kind of support that. And, for me, I'm like, I want to be extraordinary at this gift now for the first time in my life. And so now I show up, but I'm, in like weekly calls and lessons, and I'm like all in on developing this craft because I'm like, this is going to be fun. Like, how do I get to know myself here? And that's what I love what you do about Mind Valley is, you explore so many different skills in so many different arenas for excellence of what does it take to be extraordinary in all these ways. And I think a lot of those principles get to be applied to art once you distinguish and define the game that you're playing in relationship to it.
And so you also had this moment where you were doubting whether you were good enough to do your art. How do you not get stuck behind that? Because if you don't do art, you don't get the 10,000 hours.
Totally. I don't know if that feeling of am I good enough ever goes away. And I think I like to say I can be in fear and I could be in all of my internal world in an action anyways. And I know that when I even, I used to get on stage and before I would feel this like tightness in my chest and this anxiety to the point where I'm like, how am I even going to take the microphone? And then I started to transform. That's just my cue of like, it's time to go on. So now I know that when that comes up, it gets to be welcomed as like, that's my cue to go on. And then the irony is that over time, that feeling actually disappeared. It transmuted because I welcomed the sensation of it. And I think that's for all of us, is doing our gifts in the world is terrifying. Actually saying yes to being a life, saying yes to living a life, where we're really front and center in stewarding, it is not normal. It is not conventional to say, hey, look at all of me here. And like, how is this going to move? And I find that only in doing that, it is actually how we crack the code of what truly living is right now. It is living in the non-conventional or the unconventional. And so I'd say, I don't think that ever goes away, but being in conversations and having community like this gives a little bit of sense of normalcy of like, oh, you too? You feel that as well? Okay, cool, great. We're on the same good. Okay, back in. And so I find that gives a little bit more movement for myself.
So I know there are a few questions coming in. I want to give some of you guys a chance to talk to Jules also directly, but I want to ask a question on a slightly different note. So creativity, is it for people who have creative professions mostly, or like you're a musician, but for the mere mortals, for whom maybe art is a hobby, what's the place of creativity in our life? Yeah, I know it sounds maybe a little simple.
It's the perfect question. And I think for me, when I started embracing that I am an artist of my life, rather than I'm an artist of my craft, it transformed everything. So for those of you that are listening, I am a creator of my world. And you can also be a creator of your craft, but literally stepping into that context of I'm an artist of my life allowed so much permission. I'm an artist in how I design business. We were just talking, I just hosted a group of 30 on a yacht in Croatia for 5 days, for this Life and Business Accelerator. It was like, I'm an artist of creating epic experiences. We had like our own amazing race, like Water Olympics. And I'm like, I'm an artist of the Water Olympics game. And so it gets to be a context to live in. And I find in doing that, it's like yesing that as well. It's giving the permission for that then the quote art or the quote creativity, all of it increases in all areas, and it's not bound by a certain constraint. And I find when there's external pressure to perform or do something of like, well, I'm gonna go create my song today, or I'm gonna go write my book, or whatever it might be, it like sucks the life force out of it. Like creativity, life force, it is unbound. It is a fluid tap that keeps on going. And all, in my opinion, the game is how do I create more of a fluid, consistent flow of that life force in all areas of my life? And so for anyone, even if you don't identify being creative, just notice you might even be a creative mom, and how you are a creative dad, and how you are with your kids, and how you learn. Or you might even be a really creative cook. I watch my sister who lives in Belgium. She's a circus performer. She comes into a kitchen and I'm like, there's no ingredients. The next thing I know, she's like whipped up like homemade samosas and Indian dishes. And I'm like, what did you do with that? And she's like, I'm just the creator of my kitchen. And so allowing all these seemingly mundane tasks, you might even be an artist in how you drive your car, in the ways and the routes that you take. And there might even be an eloquency to that, is how can you allow just more of that field to expand of how you are a creator and how creative you get to be in your life. And this isn't just for some of us, it's for all of us. And I find starting with that simple practice then allows more of just that ownership of like, yeah, that's in me too. Because at the end of the day, it's in all of us. There's no one, I believe, that has it or that doesn't have it. With some of us just yes it more than others. And it becomes more malleable in that place.
I did have the question about whether everybody's creative, but Bianca, dear, I know we have a few questions there, so maybe somebody's ready to come up to ask that question, their question to Jules. But while you're doing that, I wanted to ask, a slightly funny maybe question, because I do speak a lot in Russian for Russian audience. For those who don't know me well enough, I'm the face of Mind Valley in Russian markets, so I'm very used to that slightly different kind of approach to things. And a lot of the people would maybe say that, yeah, it's cool to be a creator and an artist in your real life, but what if you have obligations and you're the serious person, and your job is just not creative at all, and you have all those things? How do you give yourself permission to start creating your own life? And where do you find that, I don't know, spark maybe to be okay with a different approach?
Yeah, well, I think at least for myself and a lot of us, there were these nudges that I would feel when I would like wake up in the morning, or even if it was like going to work or whatever it was, and it felt like something was missing. And it was so natural for a long time just to be like, I have obligations, I have bills to pay, like there's no space for that. Push it down, push it down, push it down.
Yeah.
And I find that over time, irony is that voice gets louder and louder and louder, even though we try to push and push and push.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the very first place is just acknowledging that it's okay that voice is there. That little voice that says, hey, like, what if, right? Even the ability to say, what if could be beyond, rather than like, oh no, it's just never going to happen because of all these things. Well, what if maybe? What if it was a maybe yes? That voice that you had that says, hey, there's a little bit more, that if you have that vision, it's actually your divine right to have that vision, that you wouldn't have that vision if it wasn't in your ability to have it. And that doesn't mean you have to believe it's possible. That doesn't mean you have to, agree that you're going to do it. It just means that you get to give yourself the ability to say that thing, it's real. And what if there was more? And I find that that's the first place you get to look at that. And I find when you do look at it, the fixed things, the constraints somehow seem to loosen a little bit. And it might not be like one day you wake up and you quit your job and you're like, I can have the life of my dreams, but it's like one micro step at a time. And that might be, well, what if in the morning, instead of putting on the news, I listen to a really amazing meditation and I create vision? Just what if I did that? Or what if during lunch, when I have these moments of like feeling there's more, what if I just wrote them down? And what if I just said, I don't know, what would that be like if? And I find the more you can create those little micro moments, the more that space for creativity begins to unlock. And the more that you do feel like you have personal agency, even when it feels like there's no control. And sometimes there isn't control, yet we always have control of our relationship to control.
That's a cool thing. Maybe we'll come back to that. But I've had a glimpse of Ryan walking by, and I know that Ryan is here to ask your question. So you can come online now. Not, I mean, online on the stage. We are all online. Hello, Ryan.
It says it's still disabled.
No, it's not disabled. I can hear your voice.
Oh, it's a video. Okay. Hey.
And the video. Yay. Passing you the microphone.
So I'll be pretty quick. I love this talk, by the way. So my huge dream goal, like, I get emotional just talking about it because I know, like, I believe this divine power in me is getting so much stronger through this pandemic, and it's telling me to go towards my dreams. But that stupid negative voices in my head are telling me these stupid things, and I know not to listen to them, and I meditate on it. And that's part of my questions of like recommended meditations. I love Joe Dispenza. Just getting away from mind, body, basically just outer body experiences, and just like you mentioned too, still shaky, sorry. The vision, the light vision of being there in this moment, being there, picturing myself on stage, giving a speech about getting my award for being in a movie. No, those are the questions I wanted to ask. Like, what do you recommend for like vocal courses so I can work on my voice? Because I love to sing and I make music too. DJ N3RD, DJ Nerd. And I have other platforms out there. I'm trying to gain more knowledge of where else to share my music too. That's kind of my question. Like, what do you recommend for vocal courses, speech courses, and just like music sharing platforms? Because my soul loves making techno beats. And if you look up my name and you see all the titles I put into it, it's meant to help the world. But just a simple thing of like, you're right where you need to be. Even when you feel like shit, like I do some days. Like I said, those voices, like if you tell someone you hear voices, they'll call you fucking insane. But like I truly believe we all have it. It's the good in ego. It really is. And my ego's fighting me tooth and nail because it knows I have something in me that's so strong. I am not giving up my dreams of being an actor and music producer. That's really my question. Like, how do I work on my voice just to tell myself to just don't believe it and just be able to be vocal to the world and say, hey, go after your dreams. Don't shoot people down. Go after what you want to do so you can lift people up. Because that's the goal in life. Like like Joe Dispenza says, you don't have to be rich to lift people up. And like once you feel like you're already there, that's it. That's the feeling. So like that's my question. Like, what do you recommend for me? For all these things. Sorry if that was long, but I'm very passionate about this. It's very intense to me lately.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, you're in the right conversation. I'm glad that you're here with us today. And I feel your passion and your commitment to that which you want to create. And the fact that you're just putting your hand up and saying, hey, this really matters to me, I would say is a great starting place for it. And my biggest thing I can share is that really having community and having collaboration has been the single most important piece for me. And that's one of the things, Christina, I love about what you're doing with these conversation series, and even what makes available for all of you that are listening right now is the ability just to have a place to go to feel these pieces and to actually have a way to say, yeah, it does matter. And like other people do care. And so for me, I've been able to plug into a few, like I use this woman, her name is not used, I've been inspired by this woman, her name is Arden K. Wynn. She's got an incredible vocal studio training program. What I love about her is I've just plugged into micro communities around music. I started a songwriting circle and, wanted to just actually be around other collaborators. And I found in hosting a songwriting circle that allowed more people who are interested in songwriting to come. And then they invited more people and it created more opportunities for my music to get connected. And then I said, I have a big podcast, Unconventional Life, and we've done, 300 or so episodes. And so I said, all right, well, if I want to know what it's like to be the greats, I want to speak to the greats. So I created a podcast as an opportunity for me to speak to incredible musicians and people all over the world that then allow me to just understand, well, what are they going through? And I found that by being in the energy and the vibration of people doing that which I wanted to do, it then allowed me to have the already haveness of that vibration rather than there's a gap between what I want and what I have. I got to actually just be in the experience, the energy of having it. And then through taking consistent action inside of that, it then allowed that to transform in my world a bit. And so that's what I would really recommend. And for any of you is go find people who are doing what you want to do and create opportunities to hang out with or be in conversation with them and plug into community. And if you don't know them, then consider being the source of it. And it can be small. It doesn't have to be online in some big capacity. It could even be like in your hometown with a group of 3 people. And that allows that structure to then grow and expand. And then over time, you open your eyes by consistently being in that, and your world starts to shift. And that's at least how it's been for me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan, so much for your passionate question. It matters, actually. Thank you so much. Jules, I want to ask, since you mentioned being in the community, and while I'm asking, I'm going to ask Bianca to maybe bring. There is a question from Ilse. Yeah, Ilse, I think. If you could bring her or maybe someone else to ask their question. Jules, you just mentioned creating a community of people who do what you're interested in. How does creativity work in a group? I can imagine it in a band where you have the same piece of music, and you create it on different instruments, and you're trying to make it sound harmoniously. But if we take it a little bit more widely, how is there any rule or what to do, what not to do? Because creativity, if it's an expression of self in a way, and you co-create with someone else, there might be a conflict of the selves. Do you have anything to share in that aspect?
Totally. Well, I feel like, just like different speaking styles and everything else, everyone has their own signature. And I find I have a big value of emergence in my life. And I do believe when you allow that which is here to have a voice, it becomes easier to dance rather than your expectation of what's here. And then I find sometimes then when ego gets in, it's a bit more of a conflict. And so my recommendation would be, the way that I've done it, especially in bringing communities, is to have just dedicated time. And I call it, Skillshare, or you can also call it like hot seating or whatever it might be. But you might even just start your first group and everyone's got 10 minutes and everyone gets to bring their 10 minutes of perspective into it. And then as a facilitator, you get to weave where the commonalities are. And then you also get to weave where the differences. And I find things only don't work when we're not in relationship to them. So you can have someone that completely has a different style and doesn't agree, but if you acknowledge that that's their style and that's okay, then I find that nothing gets wrong. It actually just becomes another place to learn. And so I find just a great structure for that is to actually give people dedicated time, especially when putting a new group together. And then from that place, you get to understand like, wow, I would have never, ever done it that way. And like, whoa, you're into metal or that kind of music? Not my thing, but how cool that, that's your thing. And so I find giving that time allocation can just allow for just some natural synergy to kind of emerge from there.
Thank you. We have Robert joining us, hopefully. You can put on your, oh yeah, hey. So I'll pass the microphone to you now. Hey.
Sure. I don't know when I should pop in. I didn't want to pop in the middle of your speech. Jules, hi. This is my first introduction to you. I just followed you on Instagram. I'm super inspired. You have a great energy and I love the message you're putting out. So thank you. My question is about really, how do you navigate this world of social media that essentially it's not a question now. You have to master it. It seems to be successful. I used to be an actor in Los Angeles. I don't do it anymore, but my friends tell me now, even when you go to auditions, you sign in and they ask you how many followers you have. So for a creative person like me, because I became a flight attendant and started blogging about that. So travel became more of a passion for me, but I found it difficult that you have to kind of, know the game and play the game. It's not always about your talents. Instagram is really either you have someone running it for you or how long do you spend on it. And then you're putting so much time and energy into becoming successful on this platform that you have to learn these algorithms and you're almost like becoming a social media manager. Then it takes you so far away from your, the creative side or what you really wanted to do or put out in the first place, that a lot of people, okay, me, I mean, it was frustrating and I gave up, for instance, just with Instagram, when I was a flight attendant, I was working for Emirates. So I really wanted to become a big travel influencer because then they would bring you on as their actual ambassador for the company. So I got really close, but I burnt out and it wasn't something that I enjoyed, doing, forcing this art just to be successful on a platform. So Instagram is just one example, you know, of many. So what would you say to people that are starting out that don't have a platform and need to build a platform, but then also don't want to burn out on that?
Totally. Well, the age-old question, I actually didn't get on Instagram until 2018 because I was like, and I had been running my business for many years, and I just didn't like, I'm a very private person. I like to say I'm an introvert extrovert. I imagine a lot of us in this conversation might be that as well, where it's not natural for me to like be out there. I do it when I, you know, it's part of the position to do it.
Yeah.
And I found that, you know, when I developed my relationship to Instagram stories, for example, that for me felt way more authentic than it did posting, like trying to like package myself into the right photo with the right post and the right thing. I thought like it could be more of an ongoing conversation for me. And I also started to define like, what was my relationship to it? Why did it matter? Was it that I wanted followers and visibility? Was it that I wanted to be in a relationship with people that I was engaging with? Like, what was my, did I want more collaborations and brand partnerships? And then when I distinguished what those things were, they didn't all have to be wrapped up into the same thing. So like, for example, like if I want to have a great relationship with people, I do that through my podcast and I do that through other ways that I communicate with my audience. Social media isn't my favorite way to do that in terms of having that relationship. Now, in terms of like followers and visibility and having that brand, that's a great relationship for me for social media. But when it comes to like brand partnerships and other stuff, I've gotten really into TikTok lately. Like I'd rather like, there's like more energy and aliveness and creativity happening there. So it doesn't all have to be in the same thing, I guess, is my starting point. And then to look at, well, what are the components that you want to fulfill, the outcomes, whether it's conversation, whether it's engagement, whether it's having, you know, a platform, and then look at what are the different ways that you can get your needs met without it having to be all wrapped in one. And then I find that like internal struggle or angst, it gets to breathe a little bit because it's not like all this like pressure with it. And then the last thing I'll say is just having really great collaborations. The same thing we just talked about. I started getting in engagement groups on Instagram, and I was just in this group of like 10 other people. And when we would post, we would all comment on each other's posts. And then gradually that engagement group grew from 10 to 100 to, you know, 1,000. But it just became like we had our people that were doing the thing rather than like being alone in this world called likes and followers, where literally you're like, oh, I can't fit my life force into this system. I think that's like normal. Like who can, in my opinion. And
But
so
you can't run from it. So you're saying you got to embrace it because we're in this time now. Because so many creative people are like, let me just go in a cabin in the woods. I'll write my songs. I'll write my book. I don't want to talk to anyone. But you're saying like it's really unavoidable. If you want to, you still have to somehow.
You do. And the last thing I'll say is you got to be real about it. Like this whole thing about creativity and art, this conversation we've been having, like my best medicine is in the dark. It's in the uncomfortable. It's in the stuff. Like this last year and a half, I dealt with a lot of really big autoimmune stuff. And I had a lot of moments of like, do I even, like, I felt profoundly complete. I was like, if I never wrote another album or did another podcast or another business, like I actually feel like good, like to the point where I was like, oh, you have more work to do in the world. I'm like, did I do it yet? Like, am I done yet? And I think the truth of it is like a lot of us in this pandemic, like those feelings, even before or after, are here and they're a part of the experience. There can be duality in the experience. And I find the more you get to share and speak to that, even on your Instagram, a lot of my poems and posts during that time were like dark poetry because that was what was there for me. It wasn't real for me to be like, come look at my life and I'm like on top of the world. I'm like, that was like fundamentally not my experience. So I think the more you can be revealed in your experience in real time and share from that place, the easier it gets. And I think the more that people resonate with it as well.
I actually, Robert, thanks for your question. I actually want to ask in addition to your question, or maybe a slightly different angle to that. Jules, so as a creative person, sometimes you do have to do some of your routines. And you did mention that before, that, you know, to get your 10,000 hours, you have to create a structure where it's regular. But the same works for, let's say, even the social media that we are talking about right now. Some of the tasks require the routine, and some of the tasks you're not too fond of, but you have to do them. There is no way around that. So how do you spark your creativity? Like just a very simple example, I have to do posts regularly, and I'm not very good to do posts when I'm not inspired. Yeah. So how do you sometimes spark that creativity when you have to?
Yeah, I love that question. So I use a lot of play. Like I'm such a game creator. And so I like to create. So when I first got on Instagram, I was actually right when I turned 30. And so it was the month of my birthday. And I created this 30 days for 30. The only rule of the game was that every single day I had to do a story, even if I was uninspired. And I didn't even know like how stories work. So it was really quite a challenge for me at this point. And all of my friends were like, how are you doing this like at this far in your life and you haven't figured it out? And so that was the context, was the game 30 days for 30. And I was so inspired by that game that the daily struggle almost became secondary to the bigger game that I was playing called 30 days for 30. And so as a just some way to look is there, what's the game that you can play with yourself that can make it fun? And it might be like, okay, every day for the next like 60 days, I'm going to post one thing, or every day, whether it's, you know, in relation to your creativity, I'm going to get up and I'm going to write for like one day, or I'm going to write one page in my journal for, you know, every single day, or whatever that might be. But if you can create a game for that, or allow it to be playful in that, I find it creates more inspiration and more joy rather than I have to do that. It becomes more of I get to do that because I want to get to know who I become in the process of this game. So that's something I do. And then I always tell people about my game. I create cool names like 30 days for 30 or whatever it might be. So like it gets to be, you know, something that you get to do with yourself. So.
Thank you, Robert, so much for asking the question and for joining us. Yes,
Thanks,
Jules,
Robert.
you know, I want to go a little deeper down that rabbit hole, and come back to the whole idea of exposing your creativity to the world, or becoming an artist, not just for yourself, but for the world. Whatever your art is, whether it's music, actual art, or writing, or, you know, your work, your trainings, whatever creativity you are engaged in. How do you go through the dark times when when you are not maybe growing as fast as you'd like, whether it's your audience or the success of what you're creating, and you maybe start doubting again, am I even good enough to do what am I doing?
Yeah.
We mostly take really successful people for role models, but if you look at any kind of field, there are so many people who do amazing, great job, but they're just not as loud and not as known, and don't have that thing to make them feel better about all the sweat and blood that I've put in their art.
Yeah, well, I really, you know, at the end of the day, we're all human beings. And that's one thing I've learned from interviewing so many incredible people on my podcast, Unconventional Life. Like we all have our humanity, and to deny that voice or deny our darkness, in my opinion, actually creates more of that. That which we try to ignore or push down amplifies, and that which we accept and we feel gets to be transmuted. And so I find, you know, for myself, like that's been a huge part. The degree of light or success that I hold, equal and opposite degree of failure that I hold or dark that I hold. And they all get to be potent medicine. And that's also the thing for all of us, for every person that you see that you think is extraordinary, that you're inspired by, like what it looks like behind the scenes to do what I do. And that was something I hit, you know, last year before COVID hit. I was supposed to do an event on a cruise ship with a group of 500, and literally COVID happened in Italy and the whole thing got shut down. And nonetheless, I had a lot of moments with myself where I really looked at who am I and what is the point of all of that. And in that inquiry of asking those questions, I didn't have anything to say, and I didn't know if I ever wanted to do another podcast, another event. Like I actually went completely dark for like an entire 8 months and just went into my process. And I don't think you always have to go so far in, but you might be in a season of winter that you're in right now. And that's okay. Or you might be in a season of summer where you're like, I'm out, I'm sharing, I feel good. Or you might be in a season of spring or a season of fall. And I think it's important to honor the internal season that you're in and just allow it to be okay. Instead of making that season wrong, actually recognize there's a law of nature. There's a reason that things come in cycles. There's a reason why we feel those things that we feel in the times that we feel. And so just embracing those seasons, I feel, can be such a huge part of it. And then from that place, you get to connect with other people. They're like, oh, you're in a season of winter? Oh, me too. You want to be a hermit together? awesome, let's only talk like once a week, or whatever it might be. Or you're like, hey, I'm ready to rock this out. I'm in a season of summer. Like, let's get after the world. And then you find that. So if you allow yourself to be met where you're at, in my experience, you find other people who meet you where you're at. And that just allows some movement in different ways. And I think the only way that you lose the game is you stop playing. So the only way that incredible art, in my opinion, stops being experienced is that you stop making it or you stop sharing it. And you can be in a season of winter and keep it to yourself. That's fine. But when summer comes around again, the willingness to say, God, I'm gonna go into summer, even though I'm like not sure anyways. And that's how I think I've had the success. And that's what I would recommend to any of you that are here, to honor that and to meet that where it is.
I really like this idea, which I probably can't repeat as eloquently, but you can only hold as much success, as much darkness you are willing to hold or you were ready to hold. So it's a very interesting thing I have to keep thinking about. Thank you for that one. It looks like time has passed really fast, and it was a huge pleasure talking to you, and I really love your energy in sharing sharing your gift and sharing what you had to share. So first I want to ask people who are right now with us to leave a heart for my wonderful guest. That's my tradition. And if you're listening to that in recording, then please leave a heart in the comments under the video. And Jules, while people are, I'm giving people a chance to leave a heart for you, I want to ask you to maybe some parting words, something to keep our creativity through winter or spring. Winter is coming.
Yeah. So if we have the time for a minute or so, I'd love to maybe just have us.
Yes, we do. Don't worry.
Okay, great. So maybe I'd love to just have us close our eyes and actually take all of what's here. And for those that are here, any words that you want to put in the chat, you can put them in. And I'll just do a free flow spoken word activation. So just go ahead and close your eyes for a moment. Just feel your feet on the ground. Just rock forward onto your toes. Let your heels lift. And then come back, rock to your heels. Let your toes lift. Come back to neutral. Extend your arms out. Take a big stretch. Lift your heart up through the sky. Take a breath in and out. Let the arms fall. Give it a shake. Bringing your awareness into your belly. And just allowing the seed that you got from this conversation, or even a seed that you want to grow, just literally feel yourself plant that seed into your belly. Hold that in your sacred space, your sacral space. I'm just going to take a big breath into that seed. And exhale, release your tongue, let it go. Divine gift, that which I trust, that's what I know, and that's what I feel. When I open up my heart to believe and receive, I can understand that there's greater things that live in me. This potent memories from the wisdom that I true, the heart, the love is something to new. If I can understand the why behind grace, then I can understand the reason behind mistakes. God gives the grace for us to feel the harmony, the life, that there's more that's real, that when I'm in my power and in my sovereignty, that I can believe that there's more in me. I let this seed grow and I let myself flow. I let my heart be and I let my mind see the infinite possibility that lives in me, the infinite opulence of my creativity. I can grow and follow and seed my seeds, that I can be the person who says yes to me, that I know in this moment there's nothing for me to get, that I can allow that there's everything for me to sit, that there's life in these words and truth in my seed, that I get to believe in the infinite me, that I am the infinite me, that it is in my divine right for this creativity. Grace lives inside of me. I let this seed be. I let this seed me. And just take a big breath in and out. Just opening your eyes when you're ready and letting that wash and grow our co-created activation.
Thank you. It's actually one of the coolest sessions I've experienced, combination of meditation, a little bit of yoga, and poetry, and it was all spontaneous. So thank you so much for this wonderful gift. It was a surprise gift to me, at least. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone who joined us. It was an amazing. Yes, people are loving it too. Amazing. Thank you. You're really wonderful. I'm so glad we had you here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing your gift. And thank you everyone who joined us. And see you soon, hopefully. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Christina.